an article here about the former chairman of an international bar council is calling for an international court for the environment to punish states that fail to protect wildlife and to prevent climate change. So what this man and a group of people on an international level are advocating is that we could be prosecuted at the state level here in Oregon, or perhaps individually, if we don't take steps to curb climate change. If you think we're kidding about this, no. The gentleman on the far left there is Maurice Strong. He's a Canadian multi-billionaire. He was, as your readers can see, he said, isn't the only hope for the planet that the industrialized civilizations would collapse? Isn't it our responsibility to bring that about? He said that back in 1992. This is a man who's made a fortune in capitalism but is willing to implement socialist ideas, including the absurd proposition that industrialized civilizations would collapse and that we should engineer their collapse economically.
Now he sounds like somebody who would be part of the New World Order.
Absolutely. In fact, he is a partner with Al Gore, whom you can see there, in a green investment firm that trades carbon trading credits, which is something, and they're making hundreds of millions of dollars from it. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry now based on the Kyoto Treaty. Let's move to the next slide, please. And now, enter Senator Lieberman and Senator John Warner, Republican from Virginia. They put in the Climate Security Act to introduce this bill. What you see on the screen there is an analysis of the elements of their bill by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. The little red hexagons are regulations, are mandates. The blue hexagons are regulations. This is, in the center is a flow chart, some timelines there. That is an enormously complicated, and I speak from having served in the legislature and implementing bills and regulatory processes and how you implement legislation and rules and all of that. It's extraordinarily convoluted. This is, it's almost incomprehensible to realize how that might be implemented. Well, Senator Barbara Boxer got some, actually introduced some amendments to it, and if you go to the next slide, it has become even more onerous, and that's what the next slide shows you. It's even more stunning to see the incredibly increased levels of mandates and regulations that states and we as individuals and business people will have to comply with. Now, in this also, there's a lot of new taxes. If you go to the next slide, please. Actually, skip that one. Let's go to the next slide. It's almost $7 trillion in taxes, $1 trillion in taxes in the first 10 years. And you can see how the money gets divided up. Some of it goes out of America to foreign nations to help them with deforestation, adaptation. And there's $500 billion there to help wildlife adapt to this concept called cap and trade. Now, it's amazing that wildlife have been adapting to the changing climate for a long time. Why we would have to give $500 billion, $500 billion for wildlife adaptation, it's nothing more than a political payoff. In fact, if you look at each of them, they pay off local governments, state governments, they pay off cities, they pay off counties, local utilities, and they pay off businesses. The only way we can stop this from happening and its negative effects on us is if we band together at the grassroots level and say no. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is the effect of this bill, the federal bill, according to the National Association of Manufacturers. This is the effect on Oregon by 2020. And by the way, there are much more severe numbers, and we'll get into that by other people. But in what is 11 short years now, the range of loss could be up as high as 21,000 jobs by then, and by 2030 you can see it go as high as perhaps 40,000. Next slide, please. What is the effect on our loss of dollars? What is it going to cost each of us out of our households here? You can see the ranges there, perhaps as high as by 2020 of $3,000 a year out of our pockets to comply with this legislation that probably will not make any difference overall in worldwide amounts of CO2, and as high as perhaps 7,000. Next slide. And then the effect on Oregon's total GDP, the total amount of business that we do here, it's several billion dollars, as you can see, of the loss there. Again, these are National Association manufacturers. There's some analysis by other people that is far worse than this. This is a more moderate estimate of what the federal legislation can do. Next slide, please. Now, there's something else that's even worse than that. And this gets to the EPA, because of a Supreme Court ruling, is now considering reclassifying CO2, which I and you are breathing out of our mouths right now. It's a building block of life. If you can't exhale CO2, if you can't create CO2, you die. It's what feeds these plants. I'm a fifth-generation Oregon farmer, and it's what makes my plants grow. They intend to reclassify it as a pollutant under the Clean Air Act because of a Supreme Court decision that said they could. U.S. Chamber of Commerce has done a quick analysis of the cost of this. It is phenomenal because now for the first time ever, 1.2 million businesses and buildings and places like churches are now going to come under these new rules if they're accepted by the EPA. In fact, go to the next couple of slides there. There's a series of industrial sector of types of businesses that will be affected. Go to the next slide. In the commercial sector, that's where you see office buildings, hospitals, schools, churches will now have to, for the first time ever, comply with CO2 emissions and regulations regarding that.